And I think the holdup was just that Ben and Matt hadn't been leads in a movie, and they
Yeah.
were insisting that they, because everyone wanted to replace them with other people.
Picture this. Two broke, unknown guys from Boston, one a college dropout, one barely hanging on to his Harvard enrollment, decide to write themselves a movie. Not just any movie. A movie where they play the leads, where they get to be the geniuses, where Hollywood has no choice but to take them seriously. The audacity alone should have gotten them laughed out of every room in Los Angeles. Instead, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck walked onto the stage at the 70th Academy Awards in March 1998 and collected Oscars for Best Original Screenplay. Damon was 27 years old. Affleck was 25. The crowd went absolutely wild. Good Will Hunting hit theaters on December 5, 1997, and it did something that almost no movie manages to do. It felt true. Not based on a true story but emotionally true in that specific way that makes you sit in a dark theater and think about your own life for 2 straight hours. It was about genius and waste, about loyalty and fear, about what it costs to let somebody love you when you've spent your whole life deciding you're not worth it. Robin Williams plays Sean McGuire, the therapist who finally cracks Will open. Matt Damon is Will Hunting, the janitor at MIT solving unsolvable math problems on chalkboards between mopping hallways. Ben Affleck is Chucky, the best friend who sees Will's potential so clearly that he eventually has to push him away to save him. Minnie Driver is Skylar, the Harvard woman who calls every single one of Will's bluffs. Stellan Skarsgård is Professor Lambeau, the man desperate to bottle Will's mind before it disappears into South Boston forever. Gus Van Sant directed the whole thing for Miramax on a budget of roughly $10 million. It earned over $225 million worldwide. It made careers. It started conversations. It ended up in academic syllabi. And 27 years later, people still do the apples line at every available opportunity. Today we are counting down 15 genuinely surprising facts about Good Will Hunting, stories from the set, decisions that nearly destroyed the whole project, and details hiding inside the film that most people have never caught. Stick around for number 1, because the single most tender moment in the entire movie exists entirely because one of the leads was so exhausted he literally could not stay conscious. Let's go. How do you like them apples? Here is something that almost every overnight success story leaves out. The part where nothing happens for a very long time. Matt Damon first drafted what would eventually become Good Will Hunting as a one-act play for a Harvard playwriting class in 1992. The assignment was 40 pages. He turned in a story about a working-class kid from South Boston with a photographic memory and a genius-level mathematical mind who couldn't figure out what to do with either. The professor gave him an A. Damon kept the pages. He and Affleck spent the next several years expanding it, rewriting it, arguing over it, and hauling it around town. The early version of the script was genuinely strange, part intimate drama, part government thriller, where Will's mathematical abilities attract the attention of the NSA and federal agents begin pursuing him. It was as though Damon and Affleck weren't sure the emotional story was enough on its own, so they buried it inside a spy movie as a kind of insurance policy. They submitted the script to Castle Rock Entertainment, where company president Rob Reiner read it and delivered the note that changed everything. Reiner told them to strip out the government chase entirely and focus exclusively on the relationship between Will and his therapist. The drama was already there. They didn't need the car chases. During this period, the script passed through the hands of legendary Hollywood screenwriter William Goldman, whose credits included Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid and All the President's Men. For years, a persistent rumor circulated that Goldman had secretly ghostwritten large portions of Good Will Hunting. Goldman addressed this claim directly and repeatedly, including in his memoir Which Lie Did I Tell?, where he denied any substantial contribution to the screenplay. His actual input was more directional. He encouraged the writers to give the ending more emotional momentum, nudging them away from a more ambiguous conclusion and toward Will actively choosing to pursue Skylar rather than simply drifting. Goldman was emphatic that the script Damon and Affleck wrote was genuinely theirs. The Academy agreed. This one is almost too good to be true, which is precisely why it has been confirmed by both writers across multiple interviews over the years. While shopping the script around Hollywood, Damon and Affleck became increasingly suspicious that certain studio executives were offering enthusiastic feedback on pages they hadn't actually read. This is not a unique problem in the film industry. Development executives receive enormous quantities of material, and the social pressure to appear engaged with all of it is considerable. So the two writers decided to test their theory. On approximately page 60 of one draft, they inserted a completely gratuitous, explicit sexual encounter between two of the male characters, a scene that bore absolutely no relationship to anything else in the script, and that would have been immediately jarring to anyone reading with genuine attention. Multiple executives praised the script. Not one of them mentioned the scene. Then they submitted to Miramax. Harvey Weinstein's team stopped on page 60 and asked, directly and without any apparent embarrassment, why two straight male characters were suddenly involved in a graphic encounter. There was no polite way to explain that this was a trap. Miramax had passed the test by being the only company that had actually read the work. That is how Damon and Affleck ended up at Miramax, and that is why Good Will Hunting exists in the form that it does. By 1996, Robin Williams was one of the most bankable stars on the planet. Aladdin, Mrs. Doubtfire, Jumanji, The Birdcage. The man was operating at a scale where a single film could gross more than the entire GDP of a small country. His standard salary was reported to be in the range of $15 to $20 million per picture. Good Will Hunting had a production budget of approximately $10 million total. Hiring Robin Williams at his standard rate would have consumed the entire budget twice over, with nothing left for cameras, crew, locations, catering, or the rest of the cast. Williams read the script and connected to it in a way that went beyond professional interest. In multiple interviews conducted during award season, he talked about recognizing something in Sean Maguire, a man carrying grief he hasn't fully processed, using humor as a deflection mechanism, helping other people examine their pain while quietly avoiding his own. Williams understood that character from the inside out. He agreed to take a fraction of his usual fee. In exchange, he negotiated a percentage of the film's back-end profits, a share of the revenue generated after the movie was released. When Good Will Hunting earned over $225 million worldwide against its $10 million budget, that back-end participation paid Williams considerably more than the standard flat fee would have. It was also the role that finally earned him the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, the only Oscar of his career. The quiet, restrained performance he delivered as Sean Maguire remains one of the most discussed examples of a maximally expressive actor choosing, deliberately, to do almost nothing, and being devastating because of it. When Miramax acquired the script and development began in earnest, the search for a director produced some genuinely unexpected names. Mel Gibson came closest. Fresh off winning Best Director at the 1996 Academy Awards for Braveheart, Gibson was attached to the project for several months. He was enthusiastic about the material and began developing his own vision for how to bring it to the screen. There was just one significant complication. Gibson wanted time. More development, more refinement, more preparation before cameras rolled. For a project at a major studio with a proper budget and a flexible schedule, that's not inherently a problem. For a project where the two lead roles had been specifically written for Damon and Affleck, two men in their mid-20s, a prolonged development timeline created an existential risk. Age them out of the parts, and the whole enterprise collapses. Damon approached Gibson directly and explained the problem with as much honesty as the situation permitted. He essentially asked whether Gibson could release the project before his co-writers became too old to play the parts they had invented for themselves. Gibson, to his genuine credit, understood the bind and stepped away graciously. That conversation freed Miramax to approach Gus Van Sant. Van Sant was an interesting choice by any measure. His previous films, Drugstore Cowboy, My Own Private Idaho, even Cowgirls Get the Blues, were largely independent, somewhat experimental works, beloved critically but hardly commercial blockbusters. Good Will Hunting represented a different scale entirely. Van Sant's instinct was to treat the material quietly, to let the performances carry the weight rather than imposing style on top of them, and that restraint turned out to be exactly correct. Hollywood has a well-documented habit of treating science, mathematics, and technology as decorative background elements, plausible-looking nonsense that sounds impressive to audiences who aren't specialists. The chalkboard in the average science thriller might as well say complicated number things in large letters and produce the same dramatic result. Good Will Hunting chose a different approach, and the choice was both deliberate and expensive in terms of research time. Damon and Affleck, while writing the script, reached out to Daniel Kleitman, a genuine professor of applied mathematics at MIT. Kleitman was a serious academic. His research contributions to combinatorics and graph theory are documented in peer-reviewed mathematics journals over a career spanning decades. He agreed to consult on the production and brought in additional mathematical expertise to verify the problems that would appear on screen. The famous chalkboard problem, the one that Will solves while mopping the hallway in the middle of the night, the one that stops Professor Lambeau cold, involves what the film calls an advanced Fourier system. Mathematicians who have examined the scene have generally concluded that it represents real, solvable mathematics, though the level of difficulty on screen is somewhat dramatized. The problems are genuine college-level work, not exercises requiring supernatural talent. The film's scoring, lighting, and camera work do a significant amount of the heavy lifting to make standard coursework look like splitting the atom. Other problems visible throughout the film touch on graph theory and homeomorphic reduction, genuine areas of mathematical inquiry, presented accurately enough that actual mathematics professors have used clips from the film in classroom settings to introduce the topics. The choice to use real mathematics serves a specific narrative function. It prevents the audience from ever doubting Will's genius. If the equations on those chalkboards are real, and they are, then Will's ability to solve them carries actual weight. How do you like them apples? It is one of the most quoted lines in American cinema from the 1990s. It is the moment where Will Hunting, having just annihilated a pompous Harvard student named Clark in a bar argument about organic chemistry and historical theory, walks out with Skylar's phone number and turns back to rub it in with magnificent, working-class satisfaction. The line almost didn't survive into the final film. During script development and early test screenings, the bar sequence underwent significant revision. The creative team debated how to end the confrontation between Will and Clark, specifically, whether the payoff needed to be as overtly triumphant and crowd-pleasing as the apples moment, or whether a quieter, more ambiguous resolution would better serve the film's overall tone. Van Sant's inclination toward restraint sometimes pulled against moments of pure audience satisfaction. There were conversations about whether the scene was too broad, too crowd-pleasing, too cleanly resolved. The line survived, obviously, and in retrospect, the decision to keep it was correct, not just commercially but structurally. The film earns its cathartic moments by making the audience work for them, and that bar scene represents the one moment where Will's genius is weaponized in public, undeniable and spectacular. The apples line is the punctuation mark that makes the whole paragraph land. This story does not reflect well on whoever made the initial objection, and Driver has spoken about it publicly enough times that it is now part of the documented history of the film's production. During the casting process for Skylar, at least one producer raised concerns about Driver's physical appearance, specifically, the suggestion that she was not attractive enough to be convincing as Will Hunting's love interest. Driver has described learning of this feedback as genuinely devastating. She was 26 years old and still establishing herself in Hollywood, and having her appearance rather than her talent be the primary point of debate in a casting decision is a specific kind of professional humiliation. The character of Skylar, it's worth noting, is not written as a conventional Hollywood fantasy figure. She's a Harvard student headed to Stanford Medical School, someone whose primary dramatic function is to see through Will's defenses with sufficient clarity that she can call him on his own self-sabotage. The character requires intelligence and emotional complexity on screen, not a particular physical type. Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, and Gus Van Sant all supported Driver's casting and held firm against the objection. This was, by any measure, a significant act of conviction. Damon and Affleck were not yet established enough to be making demands, and their insistence on a specific casting decision could have created real friction with the studio. Driver got the role. At the 70th Academy Awards, she received a nomination for Best Supporting Actress. The producer who objected to her appearance did not receive any nominations. Robin Williams did not prepare for the role of Sean Maguire by studying psychology textbooks or consulting with therapists about clinical methodology. He prepared by asking Matt Damon and Ben Affleck to take him drinking in South Boston, because he wanted to understand the specific texture of that world from the inside. The visit to the L Street Tavern, a genuine working-class bar in Southie that has been a neighborhood institution for well over a century, did not go smoothly. Williams was at the apex of his fame in 1996, and his appearance in a local dive bar was roughly equivalent to a comet landing in the parking lot. Locals swarmed the table. There was ribbing, there was heckling, and according to accounts from both Damon and Affleck, a handful of bar regulars actually tried to pick a physical fight with Affleck, a future Academy Award winner who was, at this point, mostly known for a small role in Dazed and Confused. Everyone walked out without significant injury. Williams was charmed rather than rattled, which told you everything about his specific relationship to human chaos. He loved the bar's energy so much that he pushed for it to appear in the film itself. The L Street Tavern became the gang's primary hangout location on screen. The studio eventually had to issue an informal instruction: stop taking Robin Williams on location research trips. The man was such a warm, irresistible presence in public spaces that his field research was becoming an unmanageable logistical event. The scene in Boston Public Garden, Sean Maguire sitting beside Will on a wooden bench near the lagoon, slowly and methodically taking apart every defense Will has ever constructed, is routinely cited as one of the finest pieces of acting committed to film in the 1990s. Williams barely raises his voice. He barely moves. He simply tells the truth, calmly and without judgment, until Will runs out of walls to hide behind. The scene was shot on location, in public, with no crowd control to speak of. Word spread through Boston almost immediately that Robin Williams was working in the public garden, and the park filled up with onlookers. Locals on lunch breaks, college students, tourists, families with strollers, people who had clearly been walking past and simply stopped. At peak Williams' fame, spotting him in public was the kind of event that people called friends about. The park, on the days of filming, was reportedly packed. Van Sant had to capture the most intimate and emotionally delicate scene in the entire movie with what amounted to a civilian audience, watching from every available vantage point. His reported direction to Williams was simple: keep talking. In August 2014, following Williams's death, the specific bench where the scene was filmed became a spontaneous memorial. Fans left flowers, handwritten notes, photographs, and chalk inscriptions of lines from the film. "Your move, Chief," appeared repeatedly across the wood. The bench remains a recognized landmark in Boston. People fly in specifically to sit on it. Buried inside the emotional speeches and the Southie banter is one of the strangest and most specific film nerd Easter eggs of the entire decade. A moment that reads as complete nonsense to almost every viewer and makes perfect sense to exactly the right audience. After Will destroys the Harvard student Clark in the bar, the group spills outside. Skylar approaches, and Casey Affleck's character Morgan turns to the group and announces, completely without context, "I swallowed a bug," and then simply walks away.